Hello, welcome. My name is Jess Jones. I am the center director here with the Kaufherr Resource Center. I got to say, I want to thank Henrique, our media technician, for our intro today. I feel like that was the most epic intro tile we've had to date, which I am appreciative of because I feel like we have an epic panel here of people that I'm excited to listen to hear from, to sit with, and I am excited that you are here for this conversation as well. Before we get started, a little housekeeping about us. We are the Kaufherr Resource Center. We are the nonprofit arm that supports union professionals here in Chicago. We are in support of the pursuit of professional work for union performers, and we are excited that you are with us. If you've not accessed us before, either in person at the center or virtually, welcome. Thank you. We are glad you're part of the conversation. We want to make sure that you stay a part of the conversation. So we invite you, if you don't already, to follow us on social media. You could check us out at Instagram and on Facebook at Kaufherr Center. Follow us there. You could stay tuned for future events like this, as well as our regular offerings like our virtual studio jams and our Wake Up Wednesdays, which are great community time for union performers to get together, to talk shop, and to work on craft together. If you don't subscribe to our newsletter, you can also do that on our homepage, which is Kaufherr Center Chicago. Head to the main page, go down to the button to the Kaufherr headliner, and this type of information can come also right to your inbox. So if you don't get our communication already, please subscribe, stay a part of the conversation, and we'd love to have you back for a future event. I am really excited about this conversation. You know, this has been, podcasting has been such a wonderful tool and medium for so long, and absolutely during this time where people have been talking, working, and creating from home, I think this conversation has taken on new importance. And so I am grateful to our panelists today to lend their voice to the conversation about the conversations that they've been having. But I won't take up time talking too much about that. I want to allow us to have as much time as possible to hear from our guests. And I'm going to invite my friend and today's moderator, Courtney Rioux, to the conversation. Courtney, hello. Thank you for moderating today, and thank you for being part of this panel. How are you?
Good, thanks. Thanks for having me here. I'm really excited to talk to some amazing people about podcasting.
I am excited about it too. And before I go and leave you to it, I will also say to our audience, feel free to comment and chat during the conversation. We'll bring it in as possible, but also if you have specific Q&A, I'll be back at the end to facilitate that. So you're welcome to ask your questions throughout. And if we don't get to them, you could also save them for the end, but we'll be back later to talk about what you want to talk about and ask our guests what questions you have after hearing from them. Without further ado, Courtney, I will leave it up to you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here today. We're going to talk about podcasts. So before I bring everyone in, I wanted to start by explaining that a lot of the stuff that I learned about podcasting, not only just from listening to other podcasts, was I was at FedEx one day and I saw this book, Make Noise by Eric Nuzum. He does all the amazing podcasts that you know and love. Invisibilia, Where Should We Begin, TED Radio Hour. He's a producer of those podcasts. So he is amazing. And the two things I want to say before we start that I learned from him was you got to be talking to a very specific niche, one person that you're talking to. So once you know that, you can start working on everything else. And the second thing was to have a 10-word or less description. And he says, make it, so that it doesn't describe anything else. It just describes your podcast. And so I invited everyone here today to, if they hadn't already, which I think some people have, to come up with their 10-word description. So if you are thinking of starting a podcast, your homework after today is to do those two things, to think of who are you talking to? Who is your one person, your avatar? And also, what would your 10-word description be? So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. We're also going to talk about our origin stories for our podcast. What is our process? What makes our podcast different? What equipment and platforms do we use? And if time allows, we're definitely going to get to your questions, but if time allows, we're going to definitely talk about monetization too, which some of our guests know more about that than others. But all of our guests are union performers. They are SAG-AFTRA members, Actors Equity members, and they have their own interview style, conversational style podcast. Nobody here today has a narrative podcast, but I know there are some of you members out there who do, and we shout out to you. But today's is all about like conversational interview type podcasts. And without further ado, I'm going to bring on my friends. Tania Richard, please will you come forward and tell us what is your podcast and what is your 10-word description? Hi.
Yes. Hello. My podcast is Tania's Take, Race, Culture, and the Culture of Race. And my 10-word description has most of the subtitle in it, which is an anti-racist racism educator talks race, culture, and the culture of race.
Amazing. I love it. Next, I'm going to bring up Dana Black to the table. Dana, what is your podcast and your 10 words or less, but probably more like 13 words description?
Yeah, I'm just so you all know, I've changed this like 6 times. I think even last night I was like, come on, give me 13 words. My podcast is, I swear on my mother's grave, it is vulnerable, love-filled conversations honoring the memories of our complicated moms.
Aww.
Yeah, that's
I
it.
love
Yeah,
it.
that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. I guess I should say mine. Mine's The Whole Artist with Courtney Rioux, conversations with artists about acting, purpose, and finding wholeness. And it used to be in the journey to finding wholeness. And I was like, I got to get some words out of there. So now it's changed as of this morning. All right, let's bring Michael Turrentine to the table. Michael, tell us about your podcast when you're ready.
I'm at the table eating num num num. Hi, everybody. Why? I'm an adult man who said num num num. Hey, y'all. I'm Michael Turrentine. My podcast is called How's Your Heart? And my 10-word description is beautifully queer, magnificently melanated convos about life, love, and sex.
Yes.
Yes. And Bobby Richards is here today. Bobby's a little different than the rest of us in that he's a podcast producer. So we wanted to have a little bit of a different viewpoint for you, and he's going to be able to answer questions that we probably won't. Bobby, tell us about your podcast.
Hey, everybody. So I produce the Business Made Simple podcast with Donald Miller, and we're actually working on our 10-word breakdown because this book changed my life.
Yes!
I love it.
Yes!
It's fantastic. But currently the podcast is as follows. We say that growing a business should not be a mystery. The simple steps should not be kept from you, and anybody can become a Business Made Simple professional.
Awesome. And I've listened to all of your podcasts, and I love every single one of them. I've gotten so much just goodness from every single one of them. So thank you. I am wondering, because if you're like me, you had it in your head that you wanted to start a podcast for a while before you did, maybe not. For me, I really wanted to, but didn't feel like I had the time or knew how to do it. And then suddenly the pandemic hit and I was like, well, I definitely have the time. And I found someone who could help me do it, who could help me start it. So what is your origin story? Why did you start a podcast? Tell me the who, what, when, where, why of it. Let's start with you. Let's start with Tania, because I feel like you've been doing this maybe the longest out of us for those who have our own podcast.
Sure. So around 2015, actually, I started another podcast with a co-host, and that was called Race Bait. And we started organically and innocently started this podcast, which was the catchline or the catchphrase there was, we talk about race so you don't have to. And my co-host was a white man. So we start this podcast in 2015 and then Trump happened. And it actually became crucial conversations about race between a Black woman and a white man. It lasted for approximately, I think about 3 seasons. It came to its own organic end. And some of the reasons why it came to an end were why I felt compelled to keep talking. I wasn't finished. I had more to say. And I realized and recognized how important it was really for it to come from my perspective. And so what started as a newsletter turned into Tania's Take newsletter, turned into Tania's Take podcast. and it's been going ever since.
Yeah, I've learned so much from your podcast. So thank you for putting it out there for us and
thanks.
doing the work.
Thank you.
Michael, how about you? How'd you start yours?
I don't know why I always dance. Yeah,
me too.
I kind of fell into podcasting accidentally because I started acting on a podcast called Unwell, a Midwestern Gothic Mystery by Audacious Machine Creative. And I was like, this is cool. I want to do more of this. And the two producers, Eleanor Hyde and Jeffrey Niels Gardner, one day pulled me aside and said, hey, how interested would you be in hosting a podcast? And I was like, is it just talking into a microphone? And they were like, yeah. So cut to like a week later, we were in a conference room. Obviously, this is before COVID. And at the end of that meeting, we had developed the idea of what I wanted to talk about, guest list, themes, and all of that. And then we started recording. And the question that, like, when you, Courtney, you said the person that you're talking to with the podcast, and I realized that my podcast was really talking to me at a younger age.
Yeah.
These conversations are things that I really wanted to hear. I wish I heard from someone about like relationships through a melanated lens or a queer lens, queer sex. And it's like, I would have loved to hear these conversations from a podcast, so I created it.
Absolutely. I mean, just by a show of hands, how many people are talking to your younger self most of the time?
Not just on the podcast, just at the store, laundry,
Ongoing.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
By the way, that show Unwell that he just mentioned, those producers just won the BBC Audio Documentary Award, right?
Well, they did for best podcast / online only drama. Oh my God.
I mean, that's amazing. That's incredible.
Yeah, if they're listening, y'all are famous. Thank you for helping me be famous as well.
Dana, let's talk about your podcast origin story.
So I actually don't listen to podcasts. I do now, but I didn't. I just listened to Serial. I don't know if you've heard of Serial. I just heard it like a couple months ago. It's good. You guys should check it out.
S-Town is great too.
So I just don't. It wasn't something that was in my lexicon, but my mom died. Well, in 3 weeks, it'll be 5 years. I lost my mom. So when the pandemic happened, like 2 weeks into quarantine, I celebrated my mom's birthday. Then April 16th, it was the anniversary of her death. It was 4 years at that time. And I'm coming up on 5 years. And then Mother's Day was approaching. And I, on the anniversary of her death, I went to this lake. I drove out, because you got to get out of the house. I wanted to go somewhere. I took a picture of her. This is the picture that I put up for all my interviews. It's always in my like booth. And I looked at this picture and I turned my voice recording app on my phone. And I just started talking about the photo. I just started speaking as me, like what this photo reminded me of, because she was getting really sick. She had neuropathy and depression and addiction issues. And I just started talking as me to her. And then I got in the car and I drove home and I'm sure I ate a croissant or something to feel good, the carbs. And then I thought, what should I do? How do I talk as me about my mom? And so I have a lot of friends who've lost moms either while they're living or while they were in death. So sometimes you can lose a mom while she's still alive. And I had started to mourn my mom before she died. So it felt like the right time to start a podcast. And even though I really wasn't like a dream of mine, but it's the pandemic and I have a lot of friends I wanted to see over Zoom and I had a decent microphone and I thought, I want to talk as myself and then I want to also have conversations and honor my mom that way instead of holding it inside, because this pandemic obviously brought up a lot of grief for a lot of people or brought up feelings of, there's a lot coming of this time of isolation. And so that was a way to connect to people. And so I launched mine in August of 2020. And I was lucky to be able to reach out to one of my best friends who's an editor, which I got so lucky with, and she lost her mom when she was 13. So it felt like the perfect kismet relationship. It was like, will you go in this journey with me? And she said, yeah. So that's it.
Yeah, I found that while we were stuck at home, it was a really fulfilling way of being creative and being in control of something, you know.
A lot of podcasts came out of the pandemic.
Yes.
Oh yeah, it jumped. It's like 900,000 or 1 million. I don't even know now like how many there are.
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
say right before then, I felt as a person who was podcasting, like there was a slight dip in the
Yeah.
interest. Then the pandemic was like,
Yep.
so anybody who's wondering if they're relevant still, they're hot again, you know?
Yeah.
It's a
Mhm.
great way to put out your content.
Podcast's so hot right now.
So hot.
Bobby, hashtag so hot
Bobby,
right
are they hot? Are they hot where you are?
now. Yeah.
Everybody, podcasts are super hot right now.
Yes.
They're on fire.
So how'd you become a producer of a podcast?
So it sounds, yeah. So like producing a podcast about business seems super like distant from what I was doing in Chicago, which was acting and being a video producer, like a freelance director and producer. However, the company that I'm working for now, they used to put out a podcast called they're called Story Brand. It was the name of the company, and it was founded by a guy named Donald Miller, who wrote, I think Blue Like Jazz was a New York Times bestseller that he wrote. And ultimately, what he did was he found that through marketing and through running a business, if you follow the tenets of good storytelling, you can have people, you can clarify your message, you can captivate people. And so as a freelance business owner, I started listening to this podcast maybe like 3 years ago. And it really helped me just like clarify my message and help rebuild my website and build clients and relationships and that kind of captivation. And ultimately the pandemic hit, as we all know, no acting gigs, no, I wasn't filming anything. I wasn't producing anything. There was some virtual stuff. And I joke, and my wife at the time was like 8 months pregnant. And I jokingly said to her, I said, hey, what if we just moved to Nashville and worked for Story Brand because they're just so cool. Because during the pandemic, they were starting to release a lot of content that was really helping people pivot so that their businesses weren't falling through, and they could kind of go, hey, you got to act quick. You got to think how can you change things. And so that really helped me and help keep my lights on, just kind of engaging with clients differently. And I just felt real connected to it. And on a whim, I said jokingly to my wife, hey, what if we moved to Nashville and I worked for Story Brand? We just showed up at the doorstep and we're like, hey, you're cool. Can I have a job? And she goes, figure it out. And I was like, oh, okay. So fast forward, she is literally going into labor and in active labor. We're at home kind of wading through stuff. The day before I had seen that, or a few days before that, there was a posting for a podcast producer role. I'd never produced a podcast. I produced a lot of media content and had done what I did. And I was very forward with them and said, hey, I'm a creative, but I'm not a podcast producer, but I think I could figure this out. And I sent a video and ultimately my wife went into labor and we hit the application right as we were leaving for the hospital. And about 2 days later, I got a call, went through a system of interviews, and then got the job. And then after about 3 weeks, I had to be in Nashville. So, we moved out of Chicago, did this all during the pandemic. This was all back in June, July. So that kind of led me here, but it wasn't that I just saw, oh, somebody's producing a podcast and I'm a producer, I'm going to go help them. I was so connected with this, and it spoke to me and it helped me. Sort of like everybody here is very personal. I mean, you're all connected to your stories and to your podcast because they are your stories. And this isn't necessarily my story, what the podcast is, but the fact that we help companies and help people tell their stories so that people can hear it and engage with them is pretty cool. And at least that's how I connected with them originally. And then now I'm helping them, catch on fire even hotter.
Amazing.
What's also cool? You're being paid, Bobby.
That's true.
Yes.
That's true.
Yeah.
Having
We all
a
have
salary
personal
job, yeah.
connections, but my dead mom, she hasn't sent me a check.
I'm sorry about that.
Dana, I love you.
Oh no. Oh no.
Bobby's being paid.
Dana took it there. Oh God. I don't know how to respond.
And if you haven't listened to Dana's podcast, she can talk about dead moms and make it funny. So it's
everything.
Thanks.
Yeah. How many times though did you do a Friends Ross pivot impersonation, like moving a couch when you're talking about pivoting in your podcast, Bobby?
Every time.
Yeah, every time. Great.
I am the only human on earth that I don't think has watched all of the Friends episodes or knows Friends. I'm trying
It's
to pretend
okay.
like I know what that means, and I'm like, Friends is a show.
It doesn't.
Everyone's seen it,
It
but I
doesn't
have
hold
not.
up. It doesn't hold
Don't
up.
worry about it.
It does not hold up.
Um, let's talk a little bit about process, because everyone's process is different, right? Bobby, I listened to one of your episodes and the guy was like, I don't do an ounce of research because I'm lazy and I like to be curious. I don't want to know the answers. And me, like I started off not doing too much research, and then I had a guest on. He's actually a SAG-AFTRA member, Sean Ely, and he's a content creator, a YouTuber person, and he has a podcast, The Unemployables. I interviewed him about all his things that he does, and then and didn't do like a ton of research, and then I went on his podcast, and he had done a shit ton of research about me, and I was like, oh, this is much better. So I flipped the switch, and now I do like 2 weeks at least of research. I like watch people's stuff that they're in. I listen to interviews that they do. I scour the internet about them. So I don't know, what is your all process of like, how do you think of your guests that you want to bring in? For me, it's mostly people I know that I love, or like if I am obsessed with someone on the internet, I'll find them and stalk them and try to get them on the podcast. Like, like I stalked Tanya, and then now we're friends. So it's amazing.
It's so true. You know what? That's so funny that you say that, though, because there definitely is a degree of stalking if you're a podcaster. Because by the time I've asked somebody to be a guest, they're either a personal friend or I have really followed them on social media, and that's where my interest got developed. So I'm able to cite things like, so there was a time when you like posted such and such, or else I also have a really good memory. And I find myself frequently when I'm interviewing people that I take a moment, I'm like, I'm really not a stalker. You know what I mean? Like, please do not be afraid. I just remember things, and I'm also really observant. And so sort of that's how, in terms of how I sort of think about who my guests are. And then there's the educational piece, because part of my mission is to help people become anti-racist. And so it's an intersection of people who I see sort of doing it in the real world, experts, personal experiences that I dive into. This year, I've really reveled a lot during the pandemic in pop culture, which I'm a pop culture enthusiast, and it's actually a great way to find teachable moments about where we are on race. So,
the Harry and Meghan, and what's her face on the talk or whatever, Sharon Osbourne.
Meghan, Harry, The Bachelor, Sharon Osbourne at the intersection of pop culture and race in the title.
I mean, she just broke it down of like, this is why they're being racist. It's great.
So that's sort of, I just let it kind of, the people find me in a weird way. I just stay present and open. And then what's happening in the culture, I'm like, okay, that needs to be broken down. And, so it's kind of like that. It's cool. It's fun. It's like a patchwork.
Yeah.
I think there's something about, because Courtney, you were listening to a guy named John Lee Dumas. That was his episode, and he's all about automate your system, systemize things, make it so it's easy. I work 4 days a week, and then the rest of the month I'm able to do what I want. And I think that there's an aspect of that I understand and that I get, because there are parts of when you're getting into a point where you're producing an episode every week, batching those episodes leaves you free to then create and to do stuff. And batching them, sometimes you're doing 4 or 5 episodes a day, and you might not be able to prep all 4 or 5 at the same time. And he talks about the curse of knowledge, which is that idea of like, well, if you know everything already, you might not be curious, as if you're sort of being this proxy for your listener. But the thing that I think, because I do most of the prep for our shows is I'll read the book that our guest has written, if they have a book or all this kind of stuff. And ultimately, I think there's a balance there, specifically with what we do, which is we talk to like business professionals. So a lot of times they've already got a set part of talking points that they're going to go over. But the thing that I think our listeners really engage with is when they start telling their story And if we don't know how to prompt them into that part of the story, then we just talk about the talking points that they sent in their, guest submission form or their press release. And we aren't then prepped to give our listeners in our community something different than if they're just what Eric Nesm calls in the book an echo booking, where you've got people that are just, it's like when you listen to all your favorite podcasts and like Matthew McConaughey was on every single one. Do you know what I mean?
Oh,
It talks about the same thing.
And he was,
I hate
that.
McConaughey was just that kind of thing of like, just finding that angle so that your listeners are coming to listen to your voice and to listen to your point of view and how you're processing. And I love, Tania, you being excited, or Courtney, you saying, I didn't stalk you, because the listener's thinking the same thing. Oh my gosh, I know so much about this person. Or I love the fact that you're interested in this person. It engages them because there's a reason to listen because you're interested in it. And if you don't do that prep up front, or any prep, then I think there's a tendency for it to feel cold and it just be super informational, but there's no real,
it's like surface. Yeah. And I feel like you really have to get to the vulnerability of the person, at least in my podcast. And I think all of yours, of like how the vulnerability is what makes people interested in them.
I always say, I figured out recently, and I don't think it's anything new, but it's that idea of, we can understand the how, like when we have guests on that say, okay, well, how should we be changing our lives in this specific way? How does your book tell us that, we're doing marketing wrong, or we're doing this aspect of business wrong, or whatever? But the thing that I've been pushing towards in our podcast that I think is really showing some success is why. Why did you feel you needed to write this? What's the story behind that? What's the story behind the why? Why are you on our podcast talking about this? Yeah, you wrote a book and you want to sell it, but what pushed you to do that? And that story is usually super, super interesting because it talks about this transformation that they had that then caused them to write this book or to come out and talk about these talking points.
Yeah.
And can I piggyback off of that, Bobby? You're fantastic. You're a genius. I love you. But also, like, because it's allowing yourself to find the accidental gold in the conversation. And if you've done, do your research. And all of like my episodes of How's Your Heart, everyone I've had on were my friends, so I knew everything about them. But most of the research was done about like themes. So like preference versus racism, or racism on dating apps, or just polyamory, things like that. And that would be the theme of the week. But like I've started so many interviews where that's the theme, and then boom, we've gone over to something else, and it's gold. So like I think I've viewed the research as a really, really good net. And then the net will catch me if like our talking points don't go anywhere. But like usually if you're letting the gold fly, then you're allow the conversation to find accidental gold.
Yeah, don't be like, I can't talk about that with you. We have to go back to this list of questions that I have.
Well, I always think about it too. I always think about it as if you're an actor on set, and I don't know how many people have had this experience where you get cast on a show, you're like an under 5, 5 or under or whatever, and you're just excited to be there. Or there's aspects of it where maybe you're a co-star and you've prepped, you've gone over your lines, and then you show up and the lead cast doesn't say their lines, they don't do their thing. The fact that you are so prepared that you can roll with it makes you look good, makes everything look good, and then they bring you back or they remember you. And it's just that thing of like, when you rehearse, when you prepare, when you get your lines down, when you're given circumstances, all that acting stuff that we learned in school or that we learned in classes and stuff, when you get all that in place, then you can day of, on set, on stage, if something kind of falls apart, or if you find an opportunity to play, you can roll with it and find new stuff because you're so prepared and set in what you needed to prepare in that you can just rock and roll and have fun and make it that much better.
You better preach.
Dana, quick, you know most of your guests, is that right?
I do.
Yeah.
Or they're a referral from a friend.
Okay.
I started with a dream list of friends. My dream list wasn't famous people. Okay, Governor Pritzker's on my list because he had a complicated mom and she was an alcoholic. And so he's on my list, but he's busy with the pandemic. But so my dream list was really just friends and people that I knew would be interesting to talk to. And now my dream list is different, Sarah Silverman and like more famous people, right? and or Cheryl Strayed, who wrote Wild, or these people that most people know, or you start stalking, like who's got a mom who's got a story like mine or whatever. But yeah, I know all my guests, and I send them things to think about. Smells of your mom. What did you and your mom do together? How did your mom talk about her mom? How's grief coming up for you? I mean, all these things they can think about. And then I get on the call and I have them all posted, and I maybe get to 2 of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And obviously it's there if I need it, and I can bring them back. But I love what Bobby said about that, because it is the skill of an artist to be able to sit and hold space, to be empathetic. I always lead with vulnerability, because if someone's coming on, I had to talk to a 16-year-old who lost her mom when she was 8. I'd never met her before this call.
That's
and
beautiful.
I had to share with her so she could trust me and roll with, like, she's 16. I don't know what's going to happen, and she might have come here to tell a story that she's told, and then I have to gently and as beautifully as I can and safely let them trust me, and also guide them, not like throw them off their game. But I believe there is a way to, if someone has come there to tell a story, like I had a friend who was also a novelist, and I was like, how do I get you to tell me something different? And how do I, when you say a generalization, how do I dive right into the center of it and be like, what does that mean? What are you saying? What does that mean when you say you're trying to take care of that little kid? How are you doing that? Right? So getting as specific as I can. And I just try to lead as much as I can with my own truth and vulnerability, because then they can trust me, right? That's how I guide my conversations. But I get very nervous too. It's a little dance, when you don't know someone, you gotta be gentle about it. So yeah.
Yeah.
I learned actually though, that I think it's happened more with the first podcast I had, where you invite somebody because of the topic they can discuss, but they really aren't speaking and being a guest isn't really their wheelhouse.
Right.
And so you have to kind of vet for that. So if you are kind of doing a reach to bring somebody on your show, you want to possibly do a pre-interview and make sure that they're actually a good candidate to be on the show. Because I remember we had one show where it felt like, I remember my husband heard it. He's like, you guys kind of did all the talking, but it made me think of that because it was a kid and he was just really quiet and he had a really interesting story, but we just couldn't, and his mom it was a little bit, and he did talk. We didn't do all the talking, but I learned then, you have to actually vet, and a couple of other times where I'm like, this person really isn't meant for this format,
Yeah.
So maybe approach whatever topic you're trying to cover in a different way, because they may not be the one,
Yeah.
Dana, you send an email ahead of time. I've started sending an email ahead of time, but mostly, I feel like sometimes I tell people the questions that I have and sometimes I don't. And I feel like when I don't is when the conversation flows better and is like, because then they're not thinking, I have to answer this, I have to answer this, I have to answer this. It's like, so I've stopped sending people my questions. As an interviewee, I like the questions ahead of time, but as an interviewer, I like it to feel more spontaneous and just have it be like a conversation. I'll also send an email out being like, please, if you have a microphone, please use that. Please use your headphones so there's no echo. Make sure all of your fans and heaters and washing machines are turned off and a quiet place, not too, like I do that for my guests too. Is there anything that you all send out to your guests ahead of time?
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I sent email. Yeah. Go ahead, Michael.
No, yeah, it's all of those things. I send questions, but the questions are usually like, hey, this is what you're looking to expect. What excites you about this conversation about relationships, or what is your wheelhouse, basically? And the actual questions that I send them are listener questions. So we answer at least 2 per episode from someone who is listening to the podcast, and I allow them to either like study those questions or not. And I've had guests come on and be like, oh no, I didn't read it. I want to go in the moment. I'm like, good. And then I've had guests who gave me like a PowerPoint of every single like thing. And I was like, y'all are everything. I'm not that person, but good on you.
You
Take
are-
the lead.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I'm realizing I'm kind of like of a different generation almost of podcasters, strictly because, you know, back in the day, kids, we used to interview each other in person, right? Like you'd have a guest on the show.
I don't know about this.
You're
And
making
they'd
me
like-
cry.
Right.
No.
And so the reason I say that is because I 100%, Courtney, copy and pasted that draft that you sent me,
Yeah.
sort of the pre-letter to send guests about tech stuff. My most recent interview, I was like, oh, that's actually a really good idea. But it didn't occur to me that like I never would do anything like that before, because like my first podcast, we used to record at my kitchen table and the person would come over and you
Yeah.
just sit them down in front of a mic, you know?
I can't wait.
Yes, it is. And I think it's so smart what you're doing in terms of your production aspect, giving people sort of a heads up about
It doesn't always work.
No,
They're not
but
always great at it.
but it's smart. It's
No, yeah. And just so you know, everybody who's listening, if you're in Chicago and you are a union performer, SAG-AFTRA or Actors Equity, you can use the Kaufherr Center when it opens again they have a whisper room, and you can use it to record your podcast or to interview someone in there or do voiceover auditions, whatever you want. They've got it.
Just whisper. Use
Honest
volume.
question.
Yes.
Honest question. Did anyone else forget that we were live in front of other people that are not in this room? Because I was just kikiing with y'all and I was like, oh, wait, yeah. Oh, yes, Cover Center, everyone.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hanging out.
I answered a couple questions in the Q&A. What is the union's jurisdiction around podcasts? So there is a new media agreement that you can use to protect yourself and get everything in writing for the podcast, the new media agreement. And if you want to go through Chicago, you can contact Sean Hennessy, and maybe Jess can put that in the chat, his email. That would be awesome. And then the book again is Make Noise by Eric Nuzum. Nuzum, is that how you pronounce it?
Nuzum, yeah.
Nuzum, A Creator's Guide to Podcasting and Great Audio Storytelling. So those are so if you have questions, put them in the chat and we'll either answer them live or via yes, Peter is asking if I can provide that list. I actually got it from Zencastr. I just copied and pasted. So I'm happy to send out that email that I send to my guests as well, that I tweaked a little bit, but Zencastr was great. And that's who I use sometimes to record my podcast. Does anyone else want to speak on their process, or shall we move on?
Oh, not at all.
All right. Cool. If you think it's something, let me know. Speaking, yes.
I send the same thing. I do like, what is this? How am I recording it? Why am I doing it? Some things to think about. And then the like in bold, put your headphones in before you get onto Zoom, da 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 da. Love you. Let's talk about our moms. But I also send a consent form. I do that. I'm happy to share that format with anybody from myself or that I use, because I want to make sure they've signed off on me using our conversation. I also give my guests full permission, which nobody does, but I know most journalists are like, are you crazy? But once an episode's cut, I do have my guests give full consent, because I don't know, that's what I'm doing. These are my friends. This is where I'm at. But will I give Sarah Silverman consent? I don't know, but that's what I do. And I make sure I have their full permission, but I can share that consent form with anybody if they'd like to see it, because it's just a good thing to have legally for me to make sure they're okay with me using the Zoom conversation or any of the things we say on the call.
You didn't get Sarah Silverman yet, did you?
Not yet. I just want to keep saying it.
No,
Yeah.
I love it.
Sarah, if you're on the call.
If you're watching the KRC live stream,
Sarah, you on here, boo? Yeah.
Cheryl Strayed, you on here?
Yeah. Karen from My Favorite Murder, just throwing.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, she's on.
Yes,
I might have a content. All right.
Ooh, yes.
We gonna talk.
If y'all know anybody, send them our way for guests. Susan is asking about our how the tech piece works when the guests are in another location. So what do y'all use to record other people in other locations? Bobby, you look like you want to talk.
I feel like so there's a couple of ways. I think that people are used to hearing like a guest over Zoom or over a phone. So it's not like if they sound like kind of how we probably sound to everybody right now, that people are like, I can't handle this. It doesn't sound like they're in person. Even before the pandemic, I feel like that was still a good way to do that. But I know that Zencastr, Courtney, like you were saying, we're starting to play with Riverside FM.
Okay.
Riverside is like, that's what we might be using next season.
Yeah. Riverside is great, and all these platforms, Zencaster, Riverside. There's
Podcast, right?
Yeah. There's a whole bunch of different platforms, these virtual interview platforms, that what they do is they allow your guest to record locally on their computer, and then it uploads it into the platform itself. So you almost hear it from their side of things. So like if this feed from my microphone if I was recording it on my end, it'd sound clean. It would sound very present. It would sound like I was talking to whoever I was talking to. And these platforms allow for those feeds to be married together into one file, and also be separate, so that when you're editing, you can cut out any background noise. You can move clips around. You have full control over it. They also do video in up to 4K. And I know that is such a huge part of sort of connecting with your community too, is to have that video content and the ability to post stuff and to use that as well. So Riverside FM, it's literally riverside.fm, is a platform that we've started using, and it's been pretty cool.
I'm gonna check that out.
I'll also say though that sort of the pre-post podcast worlds, when I first started with our podcasts and researched, the whole audio thing was very precious. Like, so they give you this sort of like 5 things you have to have, right? And one of them was like, your sound has to be so on point. No, listen to you. Yes, you want to have good sound. But the forgiveness that has come from these podcasts coming out of the pandemic, which is that primarily, first and foremost, a lot of people were just hopping on Zoom. It's become a much more acceptable thing. And my ear is a lot less sensitive to the podcasts I listen to. Sometimes it's just, the audio, you can hear them and it's clear, but it doesn't necessarily have the sound that it would have been if it were in person or in one of these platforms. But don't let that sort of deter you, right? Because there's been a slight shift in that standard, especially if you're just starting out. It's, eventually you can get into one of the platforms. Courtney and I have been experimenting with Zencaster, and I find it terrifying every time I have to, and
always record a backup.
I mean, it's just too terrible.
And have your guests record a backup if you can.
Right, which when it's a guest that's not a performer can start to feel like a little overloading them with things they need to do. So anyway, so often there's the list of things that kind of can deter us. Well, I'll never figure out the sound. What, and right now, especially when you wear headphones, Zoom produces solid sound, and then
good enough.
Good enough.
Good
right?
enough.
And if your story and your guests and your focus are good, then that's not it doesn't feel as precious as it was earlier.
How many of you are voiceover actors as well? Yeah. So I have. Yeah. Well, then raise your hand, Tanya.
No, I'm kidding.
Put it out in the universe.
We're gonna all just start lying. Like, Sarah Silverman is going to be on.
Yes.
I am Sarah Silverman.
I am a voiceover actor.
Yes.
Very, very veteran.
Well, voiceover actors who had to do voiceover in the pandemic. I started off with kind of less fancy equipment. And then one of my agents out in LA was like, hey, it's not good enough. You need to be studio ready. And so I spent a lot of money on my recording equipment. I got a Sennheiser mic and this crazy machine. And I'll show you this crazy thing that I bought over here.
Jesus.
I seriously.
A Focusrite interface. That's hot. I know that interface.
It's hot and it's expensive.
No, it is. Yes.
I had this, I wouldn't have bought this for my podcast. I bought this because I'm a professional voiceover talent and I need to be studio ready. But you can have a cheap.
Right?
I
use it for your podcast.
I do. Yeah, I do use it now.
Oh, okay.
Now I do. My dad, behind me, it's called a bass trap. My dad built these for each corner in this room so that it doesn't echo. But I wouldn't have done that for the podcast. So,
Dad.
Yes, Dad. Yes. He's like, let me know what to put on your ceiling. I'll come put it on your ceiling.
Aww.
So he's great. He's amazing.
I need to hire your dad.
Yeah. He only comes to Chicago for me though.
The other thing that's no longer stigmatized is recording in your closet. Like
Mhm.
I used to feel genuine shame because I recorded in my closet. And now like celebrity podcasters literally are in their closet recording. Like
Ira Glass was like in his closet, right? Isn't that where he
Office
started?
Ladies, Jenna Fisher,
Yeah.
for the show about the Office rewatch.
Right.
They record in their closets, you know?
It was crazy when we were moving to Nashville. I remember looking at apartments and houses that we were going to rent, and I was like, okay, yeah, okay, cool. I don't care if it leaks. How big is the closet?
Yeah.
How big is the closet? You know,
Right.
Okay, cool. I could do this.
Actors like, oh, that's a nice wall. That's a good wall.
Yeah,
for
yeah.
Yes,
selfies,
it's
you
nice
know?
and blank. Not gonna hang a
Yeah.
picture on it.
I like that beige. Oh, I like that beige wall.
Yeah, I had a blue like snowball for a while, right? Like the classic, gets me a voiceover audition here and there. Like you can put in your luggage. It was like,
Yeah.
I'm all about it. And I was like, I got this. I got Zoom. I got a closet, and I can do this. So I did like 5 interviews, and my editor called me and she said, "We're done. You're done with that mic. I don't want you to do any more interviews." I mean, they weren't horrible. She just said, because I do intros and outros, and it's a whole thing. Like, she's
Yeah.
like, "We are not going any further until you upgrade that mic." And I was like,
Yeah.
"But is it really like what?" She was like, "Here's the deal: the timbre of your voice, the intimacy of what you're trying to do, and if we're going to go forward, and you're going to spend money on this thing, right? You're spending money to this editor. You got to get a new mic." I mean, she laid down the law. So that is really important. I know, we're going to send you guys a document. It's going to have a lot of options for different mics, and there's so many out there, and you can reach out to any of us to ask. But I think that is really key. That mic is going to do so much work for you.
Mhm.
And a dynamic mic, or I know Michael, everybody knows this, Bobby, but I just think it's something that you should budget for, and it is something that is important. And it doesn't have to be $6,000. That's not what we're talking about here. God, what if there was a $6,000 mic?
Oh my God.
Sarah Silverman will have
Oh,
one.
I'm sure there is.
Sarah
No,
Silverman, well,
I
she
could
does.
not agree with you more. So just to make a distinction, when I say whatever platform you might be recording through, I do agree completely. You have to invest in a good mic.
Yeah.
You want, that's the
You
one
want that.
thing.
Yeah. I just learned about what Tanya uses, and it sounds amazing. And I use something called an electro voice, and have like the whole, the thing, the beam, the mount. I was going to say real quickly, I record on Audacity. I ask my guests to use Audacity if they have it. If they're not actors and they don't, we put a stack of books next to their mouth. We ask them to put a stack of books, and they record on their voice memo app on their phone with their headphones plugged in, and that's it. Then my editor takes my Audacity track, takes their voice memo app or their Audacity or GarageBand or whatever they want to use to record locally, and then she slams them together. And that's how I do my show as of now. We might move towards Riverside, but I just wanted to say that. And we record over Zoom. So you have a Zoom backup, which you don't want to really use, but you have it, and that's how you can see your guests, because Zencaster, I think the video is in beta. But that's what we do. And the voice memo app, I'll be real, sounds good a lot of the time if they're in a nice tight room and their cat isn't crying, or whatever. But I think that's like where we started, and it's an easy way for people who are like, I don't know how to use, like they just might know how to use the stuff that we're so used to as artists. So I think it's an easy way to say, I promise, you've got voice memos somewhere on your phone. We're going to find it and we're going to use it.
So Dana and I both use an outside editor. Bobby, are you editing the podcast as well? Yes.
Now I do all the
Wow.
Right now I do all the editing and the engineering and the stuff. So they had nobody, and so now I'm sort of a one-man band. But we're building because we're growing into another podcast. So ultimately we're building this network over the next 5 years. So we're bringing in other team members, but right now it's all me, which is why I'm all about systemization and automation and getting it so that we can focus on the stuff that matters,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have someone edit it, and then I go through and make more edits because I'm a psycho. Like I'm just like, I want all of the, I take way too much time on editing, and I really shouldn't do that. But Tanya, Michael, you edit yourself? You have an outside editor?
Ooh, child. Okay, so first off, the first few episodes, Jeffrey and Eleanor edited themselves, and then they were so sweet. And Jeffrey sat me down, and I was like, I'd like to learn how to do this. And they were like, absolutely. So we had a few calls, and I now do a first pass through my episodes and be like, this is the order of conversation. And then they put it together in a cool way. So like I half edit now. Thank you,
Yeah.
Bobby.
great.
Ha ha ha, Bobby.
Bobby, the same.
Michael, you and Michael.
I definitely curate my conversations. Like I don't just hand it to her.
No.
I go through the whole thing and I say from 12.2 to 18.6, cut, or I sound crazy right around 16.2, make me sound not as great, condensed.
Yeah. Most of the time I'm taking out my voice,
right.
being like, they don't need to hear
And then
that.
my editor goes, what are you talking about? It's your show. I'm not taking out the whole section around your mom. Jeff, like that's, and I'm like, just mute it. She's like, hello. So I'm saying I'm impressed that people like Michael and some people really want to learn how to edit. And I knew right away, I can't do this project without help. For me, do I do the Instagram myself? Do I put them up myself? Do I do the interviews myself? Do I schedule them? Yes, but I needed support editing wise. So, but I do still have my hands all over the curation of it. I love
I
the
edit as well.
Wow.
I edit everything.
Tanya.
And I think it is a significant distinction that like editing, like you said, Dana, the idea of you're writing the story,
Yeah,
your edit, telling your editor where you want the edit.
Yeah.
I don't adore the editing process. There's at least once during each editing process where I say, I really need to get an editor.
yeah.
And also even yesterday I was going over something on an episode and I was like, oh, and my kids were like, what? I'm like, I'm so tired of the sound of my voice. I'm like, shut up.
Yeah,
right. So, but also, I mean, I'm learning as we speak because I'm like, oh, that's interesting. The Zoom backup versus having the different tracks and there's
How long does your editing take? What's an average episode? How many hours do you spend editing? Be honest with everyone.
Pardon?
Be honest. Tell us.
I mean, I would say I don't let my episodes get fat. So I make sure my interviews are usually only about an hour. And then my goal is for an episode to be 30 to 45 minutes. So,
But I've heard that it takes 5 hours to get 1 hour of content edited.
Well, that's upsetting.
That's why I was like, what? What do you?
I don't know. I haven't. I would say 5 hours is a bit much. And again, I mean, it's kind of a very specific thing. I also, because I sometimes do solo episodes, which are sort of more leaning into the educational.
Yeah.
And so I edit sort of while I'm recording, which is I'm like, oh, I messed that up.
Mm.
Oh, let me redo that. And sometimes I can edit at the same time as I'm recording. But
I highly recommend, because sometimes I do this, sometimes I don't. But if something goes wrong, like I had a guest who was shuffling with papers the whole time and like, and I would be like, I'm so sorry. Do you mind saying that again and stop shuffling the papers? They're like, you hit your mic. Can you I highly recommend doing that, because if you don't, as much as it's uncomfortable to do that in the moment, if you don't, you're going to hate yourself when you're editing, because you're like,
I think it's really important to remember that when you're doing the podcast, it's not live, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I will do that as well. And I watched a draft of one of Courtney's episodes once, and she was really good about that too, because it's like, you just say, you're like, I'm sorry, could you just say that again? Or you kind of are like, oh, I'm going to just repeat that because it was garbled.
Exactly.
And you're doing it as you go, because you just remember, like, this is going to be edited. It's not live. Because sometimes you can get in that mindset and think like, you can't make a mistake.
No,
or I'll say like, hey, editor, cut that part out. Hey,
Yeah. In my email, it says like, you got to go to the bathroom. Say, we're going to take a break. You want to start your sentence over again? Like you're a co-star on set. Just start it again, right? Like say the line again, start again.
Mm-hmm.
And I say, and if you want to take a pause, you need a break. No one has ever said like, I need to leave the room. I mean, they might need to grab a charge or whatever, but it hasn't happened yet. But I always remind them, this isn't live.
Right.
My Spanx are over here to the right. We're just talking, And so I think that gives people the freedom, because I might have to be like, I have to go to the bathroom,
Yeah.
So anyway, but yeah. And what Tanya said about time, my editor was probably not watching this, but I used to do like 2 hour, 2:10 interview. And she was like, you need to stop, wrap this up. So I'm now trying to get them down to 1 hour and 15, because then I want to curate a 45-minute conversation with an intro and an outro tagged on. So then it's a 58-minute episode, and it just takes so much time to edit. So my goal is to get it down to 1 hour long conversation. That is my goal, like the actual conversation. So that's something to think about, is how long you want to stay on the mic with these people. And
Yeah.
the bodies are much shorter because people have jobs and lives and they got to get them in and out. But yeah, I mean, my guests have lives and jobs. I just mean sometimes we spend time just really sitting in it. And my editor's like, let's go, wrap this, we got to go, we got to move. So
Bobby, do you edit other people's? Susan is asking, where do we find these editors and how much they charge? Do you also edit other people's podcasts, or this is a full-time job?
No, this is my full-time gig. So yeah, editing is just part of it, but ultimately it's like creative directing a campaign. That's ultimately how I'm playing with this. And they had freelance editors. I know that there's places, I don't know where everyone else has gone, but I really can't speak to the rate, because it could be like a flat rate where it's like, hey, I'm always going to deliver an hour of content to you and I need you to cut it in a half hour. You figure out a process and it's like 100, 200, 300 bucks an episode, or 50 bucks an hour, 20 bucks an hour. I don't know. I can't speak to it.
It's different for everyone.
Different markets, it's different, like in Chicago, it might be less expensive than in LA, or Nashville's a little cheaper. Although Nashville rates, I feel like freelancers are about as comparable to Chicago. But I know that the thing too that to think about is when you know who your listener is and who your avatar is, as Eric Nussum says in that book,
avatars.
You know how they listen and engage with your podcast. So like that also determines the length and how much breathing room and how much editing you really need to do. Because with our show, it's like we're catching people that are commuting, or people that are on their lunch break, or people that are listening because they want that added value. They want to listen and find that marketing tip, find that business tip. So we've cut it down so that episodes are 20 to 25 minutes when they used to be 40 to 45. Or even an hour. And in the world that we play in, or in the world that I play in with just the business podcast world, I try to keep it tight so that people can go. But I like listening to longer podcasts. I enjoy listening to longer conversations. When I see something's an hour on Conan Needs a Friend or Armchair Expert or whatever, I'm just like, oh yes, I get a ton of smart lists today.
Yeah, I love smart lists and Armchair Expert. I just want to shout out, I said it in the chat, but I use 3 editors. I interviewed 3 people and I love them all, and I use them all. So it's because if I want to get out a lot of content at once, I have different people I can go to, but I just put it out on social media and interviewed each of them and asked them their rate and their process and all that stuff. And
I referred Courtney to a sound designer.
Yes.
I thought, well, what a time right now. They might need some work. So that's like kismet too, right? Like to use people in our community that maybe want to do some editing.
Totally. So Tommy Martin is an actor. Eric Backus Tommy also does video and audio editing, and then Eric Backus is a sound designer, and then Henrique is our tech guy at the Kaufherr Center, and a video and sound editor. So you just if you put it out there, I'm sure people can give you recommendations, and every one of them has their own rate. It's not all the same, so I pay them what they ask to be paid, and some are flat rate and some are per hour, and but I can edit. I just don't have time. I just don't or want to.
And you guys are gonna get a document after this conversation with some more resources. And I know Descript is an editing software that a lot of people are talking about. There's a place called We Edit Podcast. So this will all be in there as well. You can also edit on Audacity, but then it's free, but you need to teach yourself how to edit. But there are services and ways to go about looking into editing if you don't want to hire an editor specifically, right? But I think that'll all be in the document. Yeah.
And the one thing that I go to almost every time I'm editing a show is YouTube, and I just go YouTube. Okay, here's my problem. Like you were talking, Courtney, about paper shuffling. We had a guest that kept hitting the table and the mic and it kept making the mic just bounce, and so I spent 3 hours ultimately sourcing YouTube to find out how to remove super low frequencies out of the thing. So I got the mic out, but it was almost like editing an episode 4 times over because I had to go in and figure
this is why you get the big bucks.
Yeah. Well, we'll see about that. But it was just those kind of things where I'm like, oh, now that I know, yeah, I should have stopped and said, hey, when you hit the table, it makes
Yeah.
noise.
Or you're supposed to put down a blanket too, or a towel. I mean, I know it's about the table, but even their hands, if they're right here in front of Zoom, put down a towel. Yeah, you have to be your own. That's the thing. You have to be your own sound designer. Like now we got to do our own self-tapes. We got to be our own PPs. We got to be our own reader. Or well, we can get a reader, but even, and then with podcasting, we have to be our own. My editor's always like, I'm not there with you. You've got to remind them this. You've got to double check this. Have they turned on their recording device? I've lost 25 minutes of the top. Every podcast will tell you this. I've lost like the top of 25 minutes of a conversation because they're like, oh shoot, and it just happens, and that's okay. But it's just frustrating. So you have to like control that at the top. And like Courtney said, it's awkward, kind of to be like, I'm so sorry, or.
But it's just awkward for us.
Yeah, well, it's fine.
They don't care.
Close the door. Just close the door. I can see your husband. You know.
Yeah.
They don't care. They're cool. But I do get nervous because I'm like, they're in the middle of telling an emotional story or funny or whatever. And then I'm like, yo, can you not do that? You know, but you have to control it. It's your sound. So,
Jess says we also do tech sessions for union performers at the Kaufherr Center. If you want a week on Audacity or another program, those sessions can be geared towards your needs for those of you who want to learn how to do. Thank you, Kaufherr Center. You're amazing. Also, just so you know, the Kaufherr Center is not paid for by your dues. It is paid for by grants and donations. And so if you find this conversation helpful, I was not told to say this, but I will. Please, if you got some cash, I know it's hard times for everyone, but throw a couple dollars towards the Kaufherr Center because they give Jess and Henrique do amazing content for us for free. So if you're listening and this is helpful and you have a couple extra bucks, please throw it their way. Awesome. Michelle has a question. How many episodes do you record and keep in the can, so to speak, before you release them? Anyone want to speak to this? Because I'm not consistent.
Yeah, my goal. This is a world that I'm playing in right now. I'm playing catch up because we were editing and I was delivering the episode like the day before it launched, and we launch every Monday, and so I was just getting it, and it's coordinating 3 people's schedules, and our CEO is the host, and so he's running around and is all over the place just within the company. So my goal was to batch a month's worth of episodes and ultimately to record everything in one day. So we do 4 interviews one day, 4 intros with the co-host and him, and then he does at the end a final thought where he kind of like puts a little bow on everything and kind of has a call to action for listeners to say, hey, here's what you learned, here's how you go out and implement it. And so he does that on his own, but it's all deadline. There's a deadline for everything. So we get a month's out just so that I can then strategize for the next month instead of always trying to feel like I'm putting out a fire every week.
And you release yours weekly, Bobby?
We release ours weekly, but soon to be on this new one daily.
So
that's why
daily made simple. Okay.
I went from weekly to monthly because I was like, I can't do this anymore.
I can barely get monthly out.
When you're doing something, but I feel like in the world that I'm in with this business thing, it's a lot more. It's still connecting with getting the stories, but a lot more of it is practical tips and practical ways that people can then sort of clarify their message and work in that regard. So we're able to batch things, and it's not as much crafting sort of a soundscape or a narrative or something like that. Not necessarily narrative, but where you're talking with someone, having a long conversation, getting in deep with them. We're still doing that, but we're talking to a lot of people that really only have 15 to 30 minutes, just even on their end.
Right.
So we can only go about as deep as we can. But again, I think that our community, the avatar that I'm aiming for is literally tuning in to get the information to then apply to her business so that she can, make more money and try to not be stressed. It's ultimately just to calm the overwhelm is what we're trying to do. But it's just, but I would calm my overwhelm by batching a month out and getting all that taken care of.
I don't batch, and partly it's because of this topic. Like, so if I was batching, that means I might be like doing some really deep dives on race 4 times a week and cry a lot. So I don't. And it also, because I don't batch, it just creates that mental capacity to kind of delve into the topic. And that is maybe partly why I'm also able to edit, right? Because I'm not, as the sole editor, trying to edit like 4 episodes, and that would really, really be too much.
Yeah. How often do all your podcasts come out? So we know weekly/daily for Bobby. Mine went from weekly to, oh my God, I'm burnt out. I have too much to do. I'm going to go to monthly now. Michael, what about you?
Bi-weekly for me. And I do batch at least 4 episodes ahead of time, which is what I, like Bobby was saying, just like monitoring what I can handle. And when I started the podcast, I was lucky enough to have these 2 fantastic people recording, and they would just let me record for a while. And then I started editing, and I was like, oh no, this is what I did to y'all, and you didn't tell me this?
Yeah.
No, ma'am. No, we're not going to do that anymore. So I did the same thing that Dana was doing, which is like only an hour and a half at most of recording. And that's how much I would batch for the episode.
When you launched your podcast, how many interviews did you have in the can before you went live?
Ooh, we had 10. I think we had 10 interviews.
Wow.
All cut or just interviews?
I think 5 of them were cut, but 10 interviews, like just fully recorded. And then started doing remote recordings, and that's when I was like, sorry.
You know what I found though, because I had probably that many interviews pre-recorded, and then it was May of 2020 when I launched, and then suddenly George Floyd was murdered and everyone was in the streets, and then I was like, oh my God, I don't want to put out this podcast about this guy on this TV show right now. Like I want to do something important. Right. So and I was seeing Tania's stuff on social media. So I invited her, and I was like, hey, you 5 people, sorry, I'm pushing you back. Like I need to do some interviews about this. So I think even if you batch ahead of time, knowing that like you can change and switch up in a moment if you need to, what's going on culturally, or how you're feeling in that moment. Like I think it's important to pivot.
Yeah. I am generally bi-weekly, but also don't feel, I kind of just do what I want. So especially because so much of it is hot topics, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I started something called pop-up episodes, because generally my framework is a bi-weekly episode. But this particular episode, we were just talking about Meghan Markle and Sharon Osbourne and all that went down. I was like, I got to talk about this now. It's timely. So I just did a pop-up episode, and I think I literally had released an episode 3 or 4 days before, so, and also I take breaks whenever I want to take breaks, and it just I think here's the thing someone told me early on is be transparent. As long as you communicate with your listeners, because listeners get really attached. And I have podcasts that I'm like, oh, it's Friday, it's coming out today, So as long as you're transparent and say, I'm taking a break, or, I'm committing to at least 2 a week or 2 a month. Oh, look, I'm overwhelmed. Now it's 1. Like, as long as you communicate that, that's sort of the unspoken contract with your listeners, and they'll not kind of go away.
Because the rule is consistency is better, right? But then hey, we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and consistency, I don't have the bandwidth for consistency right now.
And if you're leading with vulnerability, if your show is you putting yourself out there, then they're your friends, they're your family, or they think of you as their friend, and they want to trust you, and you want them to trust you and come back. But then they will if you ask them for that grace, or you're just truthful about I'll be back in 2 weeks, instead of just ghosting on them, or
exactly. Or you say, I'm going on a hiatus, and then something huge happens, and you're like, I'm back from hiatus. It's like, whatever.
And that brings me to the thought of, hey, self-care, babies, y'all, whoever is listening, don't sacrifice your well-being for content. When editing, make sure you're drinking water, eating snacks, taking breaks, do what you need to, because you matter more than whatever you're putting into that mic. Honestly, I will say it. I just
drop the mic.
I forgot, I've forgotten that on occasion. So I'm just like, hey,
Yes.
Content's
Yeah.
great, but you're better.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
totally put out there that I was like, oh my God, I'm so burnt out. I'm taking a break. And Dana, I think you or Tanya was like, yeah, you talk about self-care on your podcast. Like if you don't
You need to tell your audience you deserve a break. Yeah.
right.
I think that would make people love you more. You know, you're being as real as you can be. And I used to try to do 2 interviews on a Sunday. I think you should be consistent with your scheduling. That's my big tip. I always would do them on Sundays when I did the interviews. That's just me, how I like to roll. But I would try to do like 2 back-to-back calls. Like I would have an hour break.
No.
With that content.
And I knew it was wrong. I knew it was going to be bad for me. And I was still like, gotta get it in, you know. No, I don't. Like the joke is also like, my mom is already gone. Like there's no rush, right? So I know this audience is like, who is this person? But I talk real. But so the point, and even my boyfriend would say, you can't do that to yourself. What are you doing? You know, why are you pushing so hard? So, and also that I used to try to do every 3 weeks, and now I might just go to once a month. And I think that's okay. You just got to be honest about it and see what you can do. But when I launched, I had 6 in the can. So that's like what I wanted to throw out there. And I'm about to end my first season on Mother's Day. And I have 13 episodes I haven't even used.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Let's go. We got extra. So I've got like extra ready to rock, which I feel good about if I come back. And then I've got a whole guest list with, you know, room for Sarah Silverman. You know what I mean?
Wait, what do you mean
Is
if you come
is that
back?
9th? Well, I don't know. Be self-care. I don't know if I'm coming back. I'm
Yeah.
giving
Well,
myself the grace to be like, I want to keep doing it, right? And so I think that's important. But to me, knowing I have all these amazing people that I could still use is really exciting. And I curate as I go. I decide like who I want next. Like I just kind of I pull from my repertoire, or I go, I need this person. I got to go find them right now. So that's kind of how I roll. But
I literally today, if you look on my Instagram, it's like taking a brief hiatus. Next episode, April 15th. Like I decided that this morning over oatmeal. I was just like, I'm tired. My brain's fuzzy. I need to stop. And so I am, you know. But you just put it out there and done. And then somebody else might go, oh, maybe I should consider.
Right.
Do I need a break? You know?
Yeah. Well, of course, it's nice to hear people say, I wish you came out. I wish you were every week, or I wish there were more. I don't want to wait. And you're like, well, you're gonna.
and like,
not
who
ready
has
yet.
time? There's so many podcasts out there. I'm like, how do you have time? I don't even have time to listen to all the podcasts I like.
I forgot about Smart List just right now. I was like, oh, right. What's the newest one? Yeah.
And it brings up a point, though, that's like the conversation that you eventually will come to, which is, you know, do I want to put some of my content behind a paywall? Do I want to do a Patreon? Do I want to whatever? And then that is a different conversation, because now you have people who are having expectations because they have given you money to support you.
Yeah.
And that's all well good. And that doesn't mean you can't still define how you want it to roll out. But right now, the luxury for me is because although my podcast is monetized in the sense that part of it is my brand in terms of my anti-racism education and the keynotes and the stuff that I do, but I dictate it right now because I'm not trying to lean into it as like some big moneymaker, you know?
Right. Same with me. It's like I get some coaching clients from it because I do coaching as well, but I don't have sponsors. I actually made a Patreon and mentioned it on one episode and then never said it again. Cause I was like, I don't know if that's what I want to do. So it's there if you want to like become my patron, but, but I haven't really done anything with it. And, don't know if I want to, but Michael, you have a Patreon.
Yes. Let's talk about Patreon. Michael,
absolutely. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. So I feel like Bobby would be more equipped for this conversation because I'm still trying to figure out.
And then we'll wrap up.
Patreon is so intriguing, Lord. But yeah, monetizing the podcast, Patreon for How's Your Heart is like the main source of any type of income for the podcast. And it's all going to hosting and like hosting as in keeping the podcast up. Yeah. And I still have not mastered the element of like, Courtney, I feel like I'm halfway in that boat where it's like, hey, there's a Patreon and I put a couple of videos of me talking with some friends on it, and also stories about me flirting with people.
I'm a Patreon supporter, and I'm
Exactly.
into it. I love your content. I'm like, give me videos.
Like I was like, I'm gonna work on more, but I was like, does anyone like this except me? Because I'm just like,
Also, like, I donate money to people's Patreons and then don't look at their content. I'm just like, I want to support you
That's true,
because
that's
you're
true,
doing,
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I look at their content elsewhere, but not on Patreon.
right. And also that's another thing to remember. If you do create a Patreon and you want to add extra content on that Patreon page, that's also more time that you might be using out of the time that you don't have to create
That's why
more
I'm not
content.
doing it.
Exactly.
Michael, did you start it to cover like costs? Was it about this will be a little bit of cost for editing, for equipment? What was the reason?
Absolutely, because right now, well, at the beginning, Audacious Machine, the producers they just like forked up the money. Who says that? For like the theme song and all of the equipment and everything like that when we were recording in person. And then we started the Patreon, and I was like, I want that to go back to what you have forked up for this, because like I'm just having fun kikiing. Y'all should get money for what you're doing for me. So it's mainly been to like go back to them and in creating this podcast. And that's like the main thing. But like again, I'm still trying to figure it out. I'm still trying to figure out what content to put on what is a Patreon?
Yeah.
Really, it's whatever you want it to be. But
and so is a podcast too. I think like Dana, you sent me that podcast episode. What was it? Think like a producer.
Yeah.
And they were like,
it's going to be in your document. They're amazing. So
your podcast is what you want to make of it. There's no one right way to make a podcast. And I think that's probably true for Patreon.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm not an expert on it. Bobby, what do you think?
Well, it's interesting because with our podcast, we specifically do not sell ad space. We don't have sponsorships. And that's been a conscious decision since before I even joined, because our business, we have an education platform that's called businessmadesimple.com that people go to, and it's almost like a masterclass style where it's different tenets of like, you know, how to market, how to communication made simple, all these things. And then we also have guides and business coaches that people can hire out. And so we were like, if we clog that up, we're going to get in our own way. We're going to do, but so in and of itself, we're advertising and we're, you know, pitching those things to our listening community. But I know that you're right with the thing that I think you need to do, or that anybody needs to do when they're working with Patreon or any other thing, is you figure out however you want to do it. But just like with podcast and releasing, it's being consistent and knowing sort of like what's your call to action going to be for your listening community to say, hey, support me on Patreon because it's going to help produce the show. It's going to help this. It's going to help you get content and come have fun with me, or come hear more stories, or come have whatever that needs to be when you use something like Patreon. I think it's just being intentional and then in figuring out exactly what you want to do with it, and then being consistent with that. And again, I'm figuring out sort of how to do all that within the confines of our, you know, just my podcast here. Like, how can we be more intentional with calls to action that give our listeners like added value, not just, you know, business wise, but just like both, like just within like listening to the podcast, they come out feeling more confident. They come out feeling more, less overwhelmed. Like they've got this, especially during this time.
Well, speaking of call to action, do you have a call to action to our audience today about podcasting? Anybody want to shoot out a little one sentence to our listeners? Surprise. I say if you want to create a podcast how you want to create a podcast. Listen to others to see how they do it, but definitely make it your own and make it easy to do, and so you don't get burnt out.
I really suggest, this is my notebook. I hadn't pulled it out in a while. My podcast tab. I wrote down the what and the why, the who, the how, the when, my dream list, my questions, my prompts. I have a brain dump of titles. We still like It's Momplicated, but we didn't go with it. And I wrote this all down, and it's like a way to just get all the thoughts out of your head. Who are you doing this for? Why are you doing this for? And then get on Zoom and practice talking to your friends. Record it or not. Just be like, yo, do you have 30 minutes to talk to me? and see how that feels, or talking to your mic for a while about something you're passionate about and see how that feels. And don't get overwhelmed, because it's the truth is, and Courtney knows it, and Michael knows it, and probably anyone who knows me, if I'd known how hard this was at times, I don't know if I would have started. And I think it's okay to be honest about that, because it's just a lot. It's a lot for me emotionally, it's a lot for me logistically, but I wouldn't take it back for the world, because it's changed my life. Boom. That's what I feel about it. But also just do it. Go make the thing you want to make, and don't worry about monetizing. Don't worry about any of that stuff later. It'll come if you want it to. Yeah.
I feel like one of my favorite podcasts just ended. Like they just finished. They're done, and they stepped away because they wanted to. And on the last episode, I was dealing with this because I was looking at my numbers, at our downloads, and they were dipping a little bit, and I was like, what am I doing wrong? I'm freaking out because I'm getting paid to, figure this all out. And on this podcast, they said, when we started out, the reason that we were able to keep going, because it was so hard, it was like, speak to what, Dana was saying, it was so hard, it was so overwhelming. But the thing that we did was we just did it. We just jumped and hoped that the net would appear, if you do like the artist's way or anything, like, like that kind of thing. And we didn't look at the numbers. And that was like the thing I needed to hear in that moment. And I think that would be the thing that I'd say is just do it. And it's about the journey as much as it's about the outcome. Because in the beginning, no one's going to listen. No one knows that it exists right now until you tell them. And so just start making it, and then let people know about it, and just let the journey, like the things that suck about it, like learn from that. The things you love, like grow from that. I think it's those kind of things. Worry about remembering making it and that experience first.
What podcast is that?
It was called Hey, Do You Remember? And it was about people. It was a group of Chicago. It was 3 Chicago people that would watch old movies like, RoboCop or Indiana Jones or Gremlins or something. And then they just talk about it for like an hour and a half, 2 hours, and just about how goofy it was or dumb it was. And it actually got pretty like endearing and fun. And I connected with like these people and was like, oh my gosh, you're my friends. I've never met you. How can it be? Yeah. So that was it. But they talked about just how they grew the podcast and how it just, they didn't worry about the numbers up front.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Mine is going to be a broken record. I was going to say, just do it. Like, do it. Don't think about Patreon or monetizing or all, like, do I need to cover a wall with some foam right now? Like, don't worry about that. Do what you can right now, and take care of yourself while you're doing it, because honestly, your voice adds to the harmony of the world, and that's what you're ultimately trying to do. But you can't add to that harmony if you don't take care of your own voice. So take care of you, baby.
Yes.
I'm an auntie. Sorry, everybody.
Yes, you are.
Tania, any lasting thoughts?
I mean, I'm kind of a downer, but I'm just going to speak to what has emerged just in the last few moments. The world we're in, the pandemic that we continue to be a part of. It's the Derek Chauvin trial, not the George Floyd trial. Stop Asian hate. Encourage people who might be afraid to get the vaccine. Reach out if you're in pain. I feel like all of us are doing this because it's coming from our heart. And I don't know. I just suddenly felt compelled to.
Thank you.
Say that. So.
I love you.
I love you too.
Jess, if you want to come back on and bring us all out, thank you to our guests, Tania Richard, Dana Black, Michael Turrentine, Bobby Richards.
Courtney Rioux, everybody.
Thank you guys so much. This was so awesome. And I'm gonna like echo right back on that final word from Tania too, because I think that the goal with this kind of conversation is to give you some ideas and some best practices and to hear like tips from the road. but the road that these folks are on is relevant to their stories. I mean, what's also true is like the road is relevant to you. And so what you glean is wisdom, and what you get are tools to build your own car, kind of thing. No one tells you what it needs to look like, but you get ideas and inspiration from these voices, and I think that's, the words that need to come out of your mouth, or the conversations you need to have, are unique to your perspective, experience, and things that make your heart race, and so I think that's what I love about this group, is that, everyone's journey to where they've come to is organic and related to what brought them to the project. And like Dana's saying too, some things you may not have started unless you started, if you knew all of the things, and what's also true is you won't know what your questions are, your struggles are, until you're doing it. But I hope this conversation has helped give clarity and inspiration and a little extra drive, a little extra horsepower to getting the car started. Because it's been really great for me. I was even thinking I will out myself right now and say I've been on Dana's podcast, and some rules need to be broken though, because I cringed after the fact. I wore a necklace worse than this. I wore a necklace worse than this. I know better. I 100% know better. And afterwards I was like, oh my gosh, like when it was contextualized, hey, we haven't like taken down any of that ambient noise. I was like, A, I'm so sorry. B, I'm so sorry.
They were talismans. We used it. We were like, use it, but she did.
It was exactly too that. I mean, I was going to say that though, like, Dana allowed the grace for the fact that I was wearing my mother's necklace. And so that was like, and so I think that rule ends up then being broken. Good sound gets broken because of the fact that like the story you're telling is relevant to the story you're telling, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so the rules that you need to create are relevant to your story. So these are all just sourced data sets related to the individual stories here, right? So now you've learned things. Now you can decide which ones you want to throw out,
Yeah.
And also in that idea of self-care. And when you want to be done, no one's making you do it. You start because it's inspired. You stop if you're exhausted, right? But this is a platform and a space,
I had a listener that literally said to me, I love the show. I need it so much. I've told everyone about it. And if you quit at any moment, I will always be okay with it. And I will thank you from the bottom of my heart for what you've given me. And you're just like, oh, and I'm like, I gotta do 6 more interviews in an hour, but like, I was like, but it was such a graceful, beautiful thing of a listener to say back to the host, like, you've already given me a lot. And if you go and do something else, Godspeed. Anyway.
And I think that's the unique power too, because you can create a one-sided relationship with people. Like people are receiving your words, and and I think even like what Michael's talking about, us here right now is like, oh yeah, there's an audience. I think even when I talked with you, Dana, it's like I was talking with you, and then later you become a little bit more aware of the wider audience, but like you don't know the power your voice has, and that's also where there's power in the story that you need to tell, power in the message that you need to get out, because you don't know who it's reaching and you don't know what power it has to impact their experience.
Can we just call out the fact that Jess turned on the camera and dropped the mic? Are you kidding, Jess?
Yes.
Lisa said, I have things to say. Let me get my Bible.
I want you to appreciate the fact that I'm still wearing a red lip an hour and a half later. So this is a rare occurrence in pandemic landia right now. Like who knows what's happening? The world is our oyster, people. I've really enjoyed listening to all of you. And I thank you guys for putting your podcast in the chat too. I encourage everyone that's watching right now to look up these fantastic folk and follow the words coming out of their mouths to your ears. And write a review. Yeah. Tell the world what you think. I mean, you know what I mean? Please. That's the other thing about podcasts. Is like people don't know what to hear unless you tell them there's something to check out. Even during this conversation, people are recommending other podcasts. You know what I mean? Right. So like word of mouth is a powerful word. So definitely
document to like the podcast.
Yes. And thank you, Dana. There will be a resource list that will come out to those that have RSVP'd. If you want the resource list and you have not RSVP'd or you're reaching this on Facebook, feel free to email me at the Kaufherr Center. You could either get my email on our website, kaufhercenterchicago.com, or you can email me, jess.jones@kaufhercenterchicago. I'll get you whatever resources you're looking for that were discussed today. The resource list that Dana has so generously made available to the community will go out to those that RSVP'd after the fact. That's our show, y'all.
Thanks. I answered a lot of the, I answered some Q&As. directly, but I don't know.
And if there's any other
Thank you.
questions, I'm double checking. I think we got a lot of that. Oh, let's double check one last. Yes, we're looking for podcasts. Thank you for inspiration. Yes, this was awesome. Yeah, if you guys, and if there are any additional questions or specific questions related to any of our panelists, you could also reach out to me.
Yeah.
I'm happy to put anything specific to the hosts of the podcast here that you might have realized you have a question about after the fact as well. Michael, Tania, Dana, Courtney, Bobby, thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for lending this conversation and creating spaces for conversation. I appreciate you guys. And audience members, thank you for tuning in. I hope you're inspired and encouraged and go out and do for yourself. This is our show. Thank you guys for tuning in. We hope we see you at a future event. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.
Bye,
Yes,
guys.
Bye, Henry.
Bye, Henry. Thank you. Bye, Jess.
Martlet, bye.
And I love you and your hair.
All right, are we leaving? Okay, bye.
Okay, bye.